Hey you guys, JB here from Alpha Wolf Consulting, coming to you today with another episode of Understanding Thyself, and this is like learning how to validate oneself. Now, in this episode, what I'm going to talk about is self-validation practices and how I use self-validation practices to not only validate my internal thoughts, my emotions, my beliefs, my values and all of this, but this is really the foundation of understanding how to identify and separate, what are external beliefs or external, thoughts, values, all of this that we take on from others and our external environment, and sort of what are these beliefs or narratives that we've taken in and have been rooted into our subconscious mind, and basically how do we identify them, realize that they're not actually my thought, my belief, and how do we identify what are actually my thoughts, my beliefs, my values. And it's sort of, to understand this, we have to practice and become accustomed to inner quiet, or becoming quiet within oneself. So, meditation and sort of deep reflection, or reflecting on, one's thoughts and even one's behaviors and actions, is a very, very crucial part of identifying, what are my beliefs and thoughts, and what are beliefs and thoughts that have been imposed on me by my external environment and those around me. Because to understand this is just, we're trying to understand, how does conditioning work? So, conditioning in the sense of when people around me are talking or repeating the same language patterns or narratives, it actually, over a long enough period of time, will infect my subconscious or be rooted into my subconscious. So this is very important because, when we don't understand this, and like, for example, for me, and that's a crucial thing. All I talk to you about today will be from my personal experience, okay? From my understanding of what I've gone out and experienced and learned, okay? So, for me, a lot of negative, thought patterns, a lot of negative narratives, and a lot of my negative beliefs were set in my mind through my external environment or my peers around me when I was quite young. So to understand this for me was that between the ages of about 14, 13 and about, 16 to 24 is when like a lot of the negative beliefs and behavioral patterns and language patterns and narratives were implanted into my belief, into my subconscious through my beliefs. So by what people, like how people would treat me, by what people would say to me, by, the environments and the situations that I would put myself into. And to understand this is just to understand, when I was in my early 20s, everything that I was doing in life was based out of like what I perceived or what I thought other people would consider to be good. So like, for example, the jobs I would take, I would be in employment situations where I was mistreated by my employers and those around me, and yet I still felt a great need to, because I was highly codependent and, I had very, very low self-esteem and self-worth. So I always felt the need to appease and sort of please other people, even if they treated me like shit. And that's an important thing, that it wasn't until I started to really work through it and understand, self-validation, and that, the responsibility is on me to validate who I am, not on my external environment or my peers or those around me to tell me if I'm a good person or if the life I'm living is a good life. And it took me so long, like I'm talking 30 years before I started to understand this. 30 years of never feeling good enough. 30 years of always putting myself into situations where I was the one that had to take the shit, you know, of people, emotionally manipulating me or verbally manipulating me. Now, think back to in your earlier days, when we worked, how many people were mistreated by their employers or those around them, a highly narcissistic manager or a highly narcissistic employer that told them they were nothing and that they couldn't do anything and all of this. Because like a key thing I've realized, and sort of why I can't work for anyone else anymore, is because employers, they seem to have this belief that they want you to be reliant and dependent on them. And this is from my experience. Like, I don't know many employers. Like, I've had some amazing employers that invested into me and helped build me up and helped me become the best in those roles. And then I've had other employers, and the large majority of them would try and make it so that there was no route outside of that job. So they didn't invest into me. If I did one thing wrong, they would berate me and come down on me and tell me how shit I was and, verbally abuse me and things like that. And it's sort of like, for me, I started working full time, in the later part of, when I was 14. So, like, I didn't really understand that I was being mistreated. I just assumed this was how all employers treated their staff. And it wasn't until I was exposed to some really amazing employers and entrepreneurs that it sort of opened my eyes. Even though after working for those great employers, I then took jobs with not so good employers. Now, when I'm talking about a not so good employer, I'm talking about an employer who promises benefits and bonuses and then revokes them based on a technical breach that they make up on the spot so that they don't have to reimburse you for the work that you've done. Many people can attest to this, to where they've been ripped off from overtime, they've been ripped off from, bonuses, they've been promised certain, career advancements and they never turned out. The way I describe it is it's being sold the dream. So ever since I was very young, my whole aspiration in life was to be successful. So, if an employer told me that, in 6 to 12 months, if I work really hard, I could be in a certain position getting a certain wage, I would believe them because I wanted that over, what I had to go through to get there. And that's a funny thing because, because of the belief that I held, okay, which was an external belief that I had picked up, that you have to do whatever it takes to succeed. You have to go through whatever it takes to succeed, which is a lie. You don't. You have to do the work to succeed, but you don't have to lower yourself and lower the value that you hold to succeed. Like, you don't have to put up with a narcissistic boss and manager to succeed, because you can never succeed under a narcissistic manager or boss, because they will never raise you up, because the more they raise you up, the lower they become. So they will always set you in a low position and then manipulate you into believing that you're progressing ahead while they hold you down so that they don't have to pay you a higher wage, so that you learn how to do the job highly effective, yet your wages don't increase. Look at all employers. The majority of them, we're talking like large companies, we're talking like small businesses and things like that. Like, the more skilled you become in your position, you don't earn a higher pay unless you move up in position. Or at least that was my experience when working with and for people, you know? And it's a funny thing because, like, for me, because I wanted the success, because I wanted the achievement so bad, I made excuses for accepting that behavior and accepting those positions. When the progression didn't happen, I made excuses for those employers. When they told me bullshit stories about why they couldn't pay me the wages, I made excuses for them. And it's a funny thing. Now, I'm not saying that, if your employer doesn't pay you what you think you deserve, that, that's the right thing. No, like, to give you an example is, in many of my positions, when I was in hospitality and things like that, you know, when coming on, I would be promised paths to regional management and paths to managing multiple locations. And then what would always happen is when those paths opened up, the owner or the manager would hire externally. And that was the thing. And then they would make up some excuse about why I wasn't ready. And the thing was, the reason I wasn't ready is because they had never invested in helping me get ready. They just expected me to be ready. Which, how can you be ready if you're not, like, that's the key. Like, as an employer or as a manager, if you want your team or your staff to be the most effective, you have to invest into them. While the staff have to invest into themselves, the manager has to invest into giving them the skills and resources for them to do it. And then the staff have to invest into actually, going out there and learning it and doing that. And that was a funny thing because, like, as my personal development increased, in my later 20s, I sort of started to see the patterns between it. But because I, in my early years, wasn't, reflecting, wasn't, looking at my position or looking at these relationships. And, it's the same, for example, in relationships. Like, think about it like this in your own life. Have you ever met someone and you click? Who you are and who they are aligns and you get along. But then about a week or two in, the rules of the game change and they start telling you you need to change. You need to change parts of your actions, parts of your behaviors and things like that. And then basically who you are isn't good enough for who they are, so you have to change to do it. Or, for example, we can be on the other end where we try and change and mold other people. And this was always a thing that I felt, in my earlier years drawn to do, was to try and mold people into who I wanted them to be. But that's not, like, especially in relationships, that's not why we go into relationships, And it's the same in business, and in employment is, for example, like if we're taking on a job and then we're trying to change that job to what we think it should be and not what was actually the agreed upon job. That's not a good thing. Just like if we take on a job and then the workload of the job or the responsibility of the job changes as we take it on. And this is a funny thing because a lot of people will do that where they'll either have codependency issues or they'll have narcissistic tendencies, where if they have the narcissistic tendencies, what they will do is they will mislead you or me, okay, into, believing this is what the job is, and then once you're dependent on them, they start to change the rules. They start to change the agreement. And it happens through every aspect of life. And this is one of the key things about self-validation that I didn't realize, was I was always, making excuses. I was valuing their opinion. I was valuing their beliefs, their values higher than my own. And this led me to usually being pressured into acting in ways that went against who I was. For example, in sales, I would be manipulated by employers into, they would always say, yeah, we do totally, we're honest, authentic, we don't do high pressure sales tactics, we don't manipulate our buyers, we don't use pressure or fear to motivate them. And then within, a week of starting the job, it was always, you should be calling that customer, you should be pressuring that customer to buy. That customer should be buying immediately. And that was the funny thing, is that so many times, especially in sales, because what do salespeople do? Well, bad salespeople, unethical salespeople will lie to your face and then pressure you to comply. And that's what they were trying to force me to do to clients, which never went well, because while, I might comply for a week or two, I would start to feel really, really terrible about myself, because I do not pressure people. I do not force people to do anything. I do not manipulate or lie to people. And if someone makes me, I'll just up and quit, because I do not do that. But so many people, they sort of, they keep going along with it, and then they sort of just become it. And what happens is it's not that you become unethical overnight. It's that it's a sliding scale. Just to the same, like if we're talking about codependency and narcissism, it's not like someone is born a narcissist. It's not like someone becomes a narcissist overnight. It's that over a gradual period of time of being conditioned and exposed to that kind of behavior, they learn and develop that's the way to operate. Because narcissists will typically do that if you grew up, like in my family, narcissism was a very, very big thing. My father's a narcissist. My grandfather was a very, very big narcissist. My grandfather, basically, if you tried to disagree with him, he would just argue and call you a fucking idiot until you fucking agreed with him. And he'd treat you like shit, and he'd make you feel like a piece of shit. You know what I mean? My dad would never take responsibility for any of his actions. And anything that, like, for example, because he has many sons, I have many half-brothers, and basically with all of them, what happened was it was always the son's fault for why the relationship broke down. Yet my father never made a conscious effort to maintain or even establish a relationship with any of his sons. And that was the thing I realized, especially in that relationship when I was about 18 to 20, is that I moved down to the Sunshine Coast to be near him because he told me he had 2 years to live. And I was investing in developing a relationship because I never had a relationship with him all my childhood. I got to see him maybe once a year, and I might have got a call on my birthday. Like, maybe, if I was lucky, if I wanted to call on my birthday, I had to call him. But like, there was never a relationship developed. And what I realized as I was trying to develop this relationship, you know what I mean? And he would get pissy because I didn't need him in my life. I wasn't dependent on him because I had lived my entire life without ever needing him. But what would happen is I realized and I spotted the trends that it was only ever me investing into the relationship. And that's a funny thing I realized in my other relationships with girls, was that I was always the one investing. The same with my friends, with a lot of my friends. If I wasn't investing into the relationship, hanging out with them, like, what would happen is they wouldn't invite me anywhere unless I invited myself. And that's a funny thing because, I've had many great friends over the time who have sort of shown me, what it means to be a mate, who have invested into the relationship with me. And it's like, yeah, I just spotted these trends in my behavior, but I didn't understand why I was doing it, because it was subconscious beliefs, subconscious needs. It was sort of like compulsive behavior. So to understand this is to understand compulsive behavior, okay? Compulsive behavior lives in the subconscious. So it's sort of like when I get stressed, if I'm a smoker, I will get the urge to smoke. And it's an uncontrollable urge that I have to do. Because it's not like consciously I'm like, oh, I'm stressed, I need a durry. It's like I need it. It's an urge. And that's a funny thing because it's in the subconscious mind. So, you know, the only way to really identify these behaviors, unconscious